And here were my options as someone who wanted to study creative writing and something to do with disability at Emerson College. Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. I think this is actually a really good video to get to know me, but I will give you my basic intro. My pronouns are she and her. I am a disabled writer and activist and a recent graduate of Emerson College. And it's actually, again, that last bit that we're going to be talking about, but also the disability part and also the writing part, because yes, today's video is about how I created my own major and I am so excited to talk about this, y'all. So yes, in a previous video, which will either be on this side or this side in a card, I gave my 10 tips for Emerson freshmen or just college students in general, really, and I briefly mentioned that I created my own major a few semesters into my college experience, and today we are diving into that topic. So we're gonna get into the story. I will tell, my experience, my journey, but also I hope that in hearing what I went through in my experience, you might be able to glean some advice and guidance. Maybe you're thinking about deciding your own major, maybe you're in the process right now, maybe you already have and you're living through it, or maybe you're just like me and very nostalgic for the days when you did design your own major. So this won't be concrete advice, but I think there will be some takeaways, so strap in and let's just get right into it. So first, a little bit of background about me and how I got to Emerson. So like I said, I'm a writer, and this has been the longest standing part of my identity, and it was in 7th grade that I decided that I wanted to be an author, like full-time. That was the job I wanted forever, and pretty soon after that I realized I wanted to be a creative writing BFA major in college. So when it came time to look for colleges, I was looking for a small liberal arts college in the Northeast with a creative writing BFA major. And this led me to a number of schools, namely Emerson College and Hampshire College. And what's funny about that is that Hampshire is actually a school in which everyone designs their own major. There are no majors. You go in with some kind of idea of what's interesting to you, you explore, and then you pen down what you want to study, create a plan, do a final project, bing bang boom, you made your own major, just like everyone else there. And this really appealed to me. Like, there was something in that spoke to me. And I really liked what Hampshire had to offer, and I really liked that they did have creative writing classes, and then I could essentially design a creative writing major for myself at this school. But the reason I ended up picking Emerson was because I didn't really have anything else besides creative writing to design at Hampshire. Like, why would I go to all the effort to design a creative writing degree at Hampshire when I could just go 100 miles down the road to Emerson in Boston, where they already had one set up for me? So I ended up picking Emerson and going to Emerson as a creative writing major. But the other important piece of background is my disability journey. I've been disabled my whole life, was first diagnosed with dyslexia in 3rd grade, but I did not come to identify as disabled or really understand what that meant until later in life, actually around the time I was graduating high school and going off to college. And the catalyst of it all was really discovering that I was autistic and getting diagnosed with that during my senior year of high school, which meant that when I was going off to Emerson, I was not only moving across the country, diving into new classes and this area of study that I was so excited to study, I was also diving into myself as a disabled woman. I started following people like Amani Barbarin on Twitter and learning about disability history and discovering this whole other side of myself and my history and my culture, and really learning to identify as a proud disabled woman. And what I found was not only an identity, but a passion. And what's funny to me is that I was demonstrating this passion in my classes without even really realizing it. I turned around and realized that throughout my whole freshman year, every time I had a final project where I got to pick the topic, I picked something related to disability. In college writing, it was a personal essay about sensory-friendly movies. In research writing, it was a paper about autism and fiction. In the ethics of lying, it was a paper about the intersection of lying and disability. In my speech comm class, it was actually a speech about Autism Speaks and a speech about audiobooks as an accessibility tool. And in my creative writing class that I took that spring, my first major creative writing class, I wrote a short story about sensory processing disorder that really spoke to not only myself, but my class and my professor. And it was looking at all of this that I had that aha moment of, I want to do this forever. And by this, I mean studying disability, incorporating it into my classes and looking at, academic topics through this lens, but also writing about disability, particularly creative writing about disability. Like I said, writing was a huge part of me. I still wanted to study that, but there was this other side to myself, my passions, my career goals that was developing, and I wanted to give it the space it deserved. So when I came back to Emerson in the fall of my sophomore year, I got to work. I set up an appointment with my academic advisor, Lori, and told her pretty much what I just told y'all and asked her, what do I do? What are my options here? And here were my options as someone who wanted to study creative writing and something to do with disability at Emerson College. Number one, minors. At Emerson, there were a couple of minors that were sort of related to disability and that could sort of fill this thing that I wanted to do. Because also, mind you, I have a lot of clarity on what it was that I wanted now looking back at it, but in the moment, I still wasn't even entirely sure what I wanted. I knew it was disability related, but a psychology minor could have possibly been right. It wasn't, and I knew that in my gut, but it was on the table. So was this other minor called Health and Society. It was a minor that had classes about, public health and, biology and, health and society. It seemed like it kind of fit what I was looking for, but it was just missing something. And it was in looking at these two minor options and realizing they didn't fit right that made me understand exactly what it was that I wanted. I wanted disability studies. I wanted to study disability. I didn't just want to study psychology or mental health or one particular disability. Like, we actually did also have a hearing and deafness minor, but that wasn't it either, because I wanted disability in a broad sense, disability justice, disability rights, disability history, culture, identity, disability studies. And Emerson doesn't have disability studies. So this is where the second option came in, transferring. If I wanted to study disability studies, Emerson maybe wasn't going to be the place to do that. And I did actually do some research about other schools with disability studies programs, because they exist. They're a little hard to find, and a lot of places don't have them in a bachelor's degree, but they do exist, and I looked at them and kind of realized that that wasn't really the right option for me either. First of all, I didn't just want disability studies, I wanted creative writing and disability studies. And theoretically, there could have been a school where I could double major in creative writing and disability studies, but you take two bachelor's programs that are very rare and hard to find, and it becomes virtually impossible to find a school that has both. And second of all, I didn't want to leave Emerson. I'd worked really hard my freshman year to establish myself, get a support team, find friends, feel comfortable in the space. And I loved the school, the environment, the values, this sort of arts and communication focus. There's a lot of stuff I love about Emerson, and I didn't want to leave. And so that left me with basically one option, creating my own major, which is what I did. Let me just pause here and say that everyone who goes through this process of creating their own major is going to have a different experience, especially because every school is going to have different requirements and a different way that they expect their students to create their own major. So that's really why this video isn't concrete advice, because there's so much variance. And as someone who is taking the initiative to create their own major, I trust that you have a basic understanding of how to advocate for yourself and how to seek out your resources and work on crafting this major. But I will say that the key piece of doing it is doing it with support. You cannot do this alone, and most programs that I know of don't allow you to do it alone. Like at Emerson, I had to be in constant contact with Lori as my academic advisor, or else this just was not a possibility. And they do that because you need support, you need guidance, it's your major, you're designing it yourself, but you can't do something like that completely alone. So if you're looking for any concrete advice, take that, work with people, use your resources, and also get familiar with whatever is required of you, because I certainly got very familiar with what was required of me, so much so that when I was planning to make this video, I didn't even have to look back at my notes from 2 years ago, because it was all just in my brain. Still, it's been years. So what was required of me, a little old Emersonian venturing into the world of IDIPs, which I should say stands for Independently Designed Interdisciplinary Program? It's just what we call it. Everyone has a different name for these things. Every school is different. I already made that point. Moving on. So I had 4 things that I had to do. 5 if you count the degree audit that I had to print out, but like, that's not work. 4 things that I had to handcraft. Number 1, a brief 100-word summary of the IDIP and its academic focus. Number 2, an expanded version of this that was a 3 to 4 page proposal narrative. Number 3, the proposed course of study, basically the classes that you were going to pick for your IDIP. And number 4, a signature sheet showing support from the academic departments and chairs that you are pulling your classes from. If that seems like a lot, it's because it is, and it's because it's supposed to be. Designing a major is not meant to be easy. It is supposed to challenge you, and it is supposed to push you to create something that is truly sound and solid. It's also, to some degree, meant to weed out people who the IDIP is not the best option for. And it's not to say that they're not fit for it or cut out for it or they don't have what it takes. Just that, you know, like I said, I had different options in front of me, and the IDIP proposal process was meant to make sure that I was 100% certain that none of those other options were going to work for me. The proposal process was meant to make you say, yeah, I looked at all my options, and the hardest one, making my own major, was the best one and the only one that actually made sense for me. So they push you, and you have to go through this whole process and really think and figure it out. And that is what I did for 6 months. First thing I got to work on was the course plan, because it's kind of foundational. If you don't have classes for your IDIP, then you don't have an IDIP. And there's actually quite a few specifications that your course plan has to have, because remember, you're designing a major. Majors are usually designed by like academic committees and like big wigs at the college and like fancy people that get paid a lot of money, and you're a student doing it yourself. So there's stuff you have to do to make sure it's going to count and like be a real major. And at Emerson, that was 44 to 52 credits, which broke down to 11 to 13 classes, 3 of which had to be at the 300 level or higher. And while they didn't require a capstone, it was strongly encouraged. And from the beginning, I knew that my major was going to have 2 very strong components: the creative writing side and the disability side. And one was a lot easier to create than the other, because at Emerson, there's already a creative writing degree, and I was already in it. So I knew that degree very, very well. And even if I hadn't, there was a very handy-dandy list of all the classes in the WLP department and in the creative writing BFA major. So I could just take that list and extract the classes that I thought fit what I was wanting to do in the creative writing side of my major, and bing bang boom, it was done. Like, it did take a little bit of finessing, like, do I want to include literature classes or just writing classes? How many classes can I afford to put towards this half of my major? Because remember, I only had 11 to 13, which broke down to about, 5 to 7 classes per side. But like I said, it was pretty easy to figure out. And while there were some tweaks that came later along in the process, I'll go ahead and tell you now what the creative writing side of my major ended up looking in its final form. First of all, we had 2 literature classes that I had actually already taken at the time that I put forth my IDIP, which is a huge life hack when you're designing your own major, especially doing it a little bit of the ways into your college experience. I should have specified this earlier in the video, but I was designing my major from about October to February of my sophomore year, which meant that I wouldn't actually be starting as an official IDIP major until my 5th semester of college in my fall of my junior year. So it was really advantageous for me to pick IDIP classes that I had already taken so that I could graduate on time. So like I said, 2 very foundational lit classes that I'd already taken, and then I selected 3 creative writing workshops at the 200, 300, and 400 level, which is pretty much the backbone of the original creative writing BFA major, except for in that program, you have to take multiple workshops at the 200 and 300 level across different genres. I just picked one from each because I'm a fiction writer and because I didn't have the space to put in other genres. So I focused on what I was actually going to be doing and utilized those fiction classes as the backbone of my creative writing side of my major. So that rounds out to 5 classes on the creative writing side of my major. The disability side, a bit more challenging to put together. Because like I said, there was no convenient disability studies program or list of classes for me to look at. I had to go find all of the disability related classes on my own. But there were a lot of ways for me to go about finding these classes, most of which involved getting very, very familiar with the course catalog. First of all, I started looking at programs and majors and departments that were tangentially related to disability. Psychology, health and society minor, we've got that hearing and deafness minor that's a part of our communication sciences and disorders major, which is basically preparing students to become speech pathologists and other professionals within that sort of realm, which was not what I wanted to do. But there were classes in that program that were related to disability and could be useful for the major that I was trying to craft. So I pulled classes from those areas at the college, started putting them in a nice Google Doc, amassing a giant list, and then I also went back in the catalog and did a nice Command F for disability, basically searching for anywhere the word disability, disabled, anything like that came up in the course catalog. And this brought me to a lot of those same classes, but also to things like, history classes that mentioned the fact that they were going to talk about, the politics of the Middle East through a race, gender, and disability lens. Now, I didn't find that many of these types of things because most people don't include disability in those types of courses, but I did find some, and it did start getting me thinking about, other ways that disability might show up in this degree, which then just led me to reading through the course catalog. I had to just make sure that I wasn't missing anything through these more conventional ways of searching for classes, and you just never know what you're going to find, and you never know what connections you're going to be able to make. And this was actually really, really useful, not because I remember any class in particular coming from this part of my searching, but because it really got me thinking about classes that I might want to take as electives. Like maybe this course doesn't really fit disability studies and doesn't fit in this IDIP, but could be really useful as an elective that could speak to my major. So I'll take note of that and take it my senior year as an elective. So the course catalog was my best friend for a very long time, but I did also utilize humans. Like I was saying before, you have to do this in collaboration. You have to get support from people who understand these fields and understand how the academic space at Emerson works. And Lori was a huge part of this, as I've probably already said many times in this video, but I would not have gotten through any of this without her. At this point in the process, the help she gave me was essentially taking this giant list of disability classes I had created and combing through it, giving me her expert opinion on whether or not these classes actually were what I thought they were and actually would fit into my major and the way that I thought they would, which was so helpful because, there were a lot of classes on there, many more than I had space for, and she was able to help narrow it down for me. It was also helpful to talk to people who were more specifically in the fields I was trying to study. So I was actually taking a literature class that fall with the undergraduate coordinator of the WLP department. So I met with him. He got me thinking about, this major sort of in a conceptual way, big picture, what is this major? What am I going to do with it? How does it function in the world? And just really thinking about it high in the sky. It was honestly a lot of fun. And I also had that conversation with a woman named Nancy Allen, who is a faculty member in the Liberal Arts Institute and the teacher of the pretty much one and only disability studies, disability focused, disability forward class at Emerson, disability in the media. So we had a really wonderful conversation, and she really got me going off in the right direction with this disability side of my major that I definitely needed more help in putting together. So after all these conversations, I was able to narrow down my classes and take this sort of amorphous list of disability related classes and turn it into an actual course plan. In the designing of an IDIP, you're not required to figure out when exactly you're going to take each class, but I did anyways because I was trying to figure out the prerequisites, and also, like I said, I knew that I only had about 4 semesters left of my college experience, so I wanted to really make sure that I was getting this in a way that I could actually take it and graduate on time. So at this point, I printed out my narrowed down list of classes that were going to be relevant to my major, both on the disability and creative writing side, got down on the floor, and started getting strategic. I was moving classes around. I had each semester in a little column, and I was like, okay, if I take this class here, then I have to take this class before it so that I can get the prereq, and this serves as a prereq for this, but this doesn't have a prereq, so I should take it earlier, and this makes logical sense to take this class before this one, and I gotta make sure I get a 300 before I get the 400, and It was actually so fun. I love strategic thinking and strategic planning, so I had a blast getting down there and like moving everything around and trying to make it work and make it fit. And in doing this, it really helped me figure out exactly which 5 classes I wanted to have on the disability side of my major. And so those 5 courses ended up being 2 psychology classes, one at the 200 level, which I could either pick abnormal psychology or developmental psychology, and one at the 300 level, a course called Narratives of Disorder, which was just perfect, you know? Then I had 2 comm disorders, one of which was disability in the media, like I talked about earlier, and then my other CD class was entitled Autism. And then my 5th class was a science course, which just like psychology is housed within the Liberal Arts Institute at Emerson, and that class was the brain and behavior, which is basically like a neurobiology class. And so those are my 5 disability courses, and then we take those 5 creative writing classes from earlier, and that was the essence of my major. Now you're probably thinking, didn't you need at least 11? And yes, I did. Capstones, capstones, capstones. We'll get there. Trust me, we'll get there. And it's not that I didn't have capstones involved in my major at this point. Like I never showed Lori a version of my IDIP that had less than the required 11 classes. I'm just not talking about them yet because they will become very relevant to a later part of the story. So timeline-wise, we are about at the end of my fall semester. So by the time winter break rolled around, I pretty much had everything laid out. And so that meant that I got to go home, enjoy the holidays, and work on my written parts, which honestly I'm so thankful for. Like my brain could not have handled trying to write this narrative persuasive proposal during the semester, because let me just remind you, I'm doing all of this work to create my own major while taking a full course load as a disabled student. This was so much work, and like my brain needed a little bit of a break, and my brain also needed to devote like full days to telling this story of why I wanted to do this major and why these classes were the ones that made it possible. Since I'm a long form writer, and as you can probably tell from my YouTube videos, always have a lot to say about things, I started with the 3 to 4 page narrative, which actually I'm pretty sure ended up being more like 5 to 7 pages, but it was okay. Lori said it was fine. But I started with the long version, took that, formulated it into a short 100-word version, and then came back in the spring semester, mid-January, with pretty much everything I needed for my IDIP there. Yes, there were edits, there were tweaks, I had to get it like just perfect, but I was able to go to Lori and say, here it is. Lori did all her checks and balances stuff again, read over the narrative, just looked at everything and said, Harper, you did it. You got a whole proposal together. Like, my final approval is here. It's time to go get those signatures. This is where the story becomes a story. Honestly, if I wanted to, I could make a whole storytime video about this like week of my life, but I will be brief. I will give it to you in the simplest of versions. So timeline check. I met with Lori on Friday, February 8th, and this was when she gave me her final approval. And so the IDIP was due the next Friday, on February 15th. But Lori was going to be out of the office on that Friday the 15th, and so technically speaking, my IDIP was really due on the 14th, which yes, was Valentine's Day, but it was due on the 14th because she had to sign the IDIP form as well, and she wouldn't sign it until I had gotten all my department chairs to sign it. So I had less than a week to get signatures from the department chairs, which is doable, totally doable. It just got a bit complicated. So I had to get 3 signatures. First one, writing, literature, and publishing, pretty cut and dry. Second one, communication sciences and disorders, because even though I was only taking 2 classes from their department, disability studies fit most closely with their department, so their signature. And then lastly, the Liberal Arts Institute, because I was taking classes from the Liberal Arts Institute. So I had to get signatures from those 2 chairs and the Dean of Liberal Arts, which was a bit daunting because those are some important people. But on that Friday the 8th, I sent out some emails, I made appointments, and I was all set up to get my signatures. And honestly, talking to the WLP chair and the CSD chair was so much fun. I was probably only in their offices for about 5 minutes. I just gave them an elevator pitch. They said, that's so cool. And I signed off on it. Super, super easy. was not as easy getting the Dean of Liberal Arts to sign off on my IDIP. And let me just say before I get into anything, I love Dean Ansell. I didn't know her at the time of creating my IDIP, but since then I've worked with her in a couple of different capacities, you know, through student leadership and stuff like that. I've really enjoyed being in meetings with her and seeing her work, and I know she's done some really, really important and impactful things for members of our interdisciplinary community. So much love and much respect for Dean Ansell. But it was a really hard couple of days for me that February. So I met with Dean Ansell on Tuesday morning. I gave her the same basic pitch and proposal, let her look over my materials, same as the chairs, and she again said that she really liked what I had going here, that it was really cool and really interesting, but that she wasn't quite there yet. There were a couple of tweaks that she recommended, some that were pretty minor and some that were a little bit more structural. She couldn't really see the difference between having this creative writing and disability studies major and a creative writing major with a health and society minor. The classes were very similar, and she basically told me, I think that might be an easier and better option for you to go with. Which, to some of the points I've made in this video, is a very logical thing to suggest, and honestly speaks to one of the really challenging parts of creating an IDIP. Essentially, you have to create a major that doesn't exist using building blocks that already do. But the building blocks only exist because they have certain majors that they make up. So if you find the building blocks for something, chances are the thing that you're trying to create with it has already been created. So it's kind of a paradox. And I knew that going into this whole process. I knew it was not going to be easy, and I'd put in so much hard work, just months and months of pouring every ounce of myself into this major. And that's why it hurt so bad when I walked out of her office that day without a signature. It just felt like everything I had worked for was slipping out of my fingers. It wasn't like it was over. Like, she told me to take the feedback and rework it and bring it back to her and she would sign it then. But it just felt so crushing, and let me just tell y'all, I had a total breakdown. Like, I cried so freaking hard because it was a release. I needed the release. It was so cathartic. I called my mom, like, just cried, yelled, talked through it, and I got all the emotions out and I was ready to get back to work. In the emotional frenzy and conversation with my mom, I realized what I had to do. I figured out how to not just make my IDIP something that Dean Ansell would sign off on, but something that was actually so much closer to what I wanted and really created the major that I was looking for. Because at this point, my major actually had 13 classes. The 10 that I talked about earlier, one extra literature class, the senior creative writing thesis, which was the capstone that all the BFA students used in their creative writing majors, and on the disability side of my major, I had a directed study in either literature or history because I had found that other disability studies programs often had disability lit classes or disability history classes, which I couldn't find a match for at Emerson. This setup had two main issues. The first of which was that there were 7 classes on one side and 6 on the other. I'd already written in my narrative that the point of this major was to have disability and creative writing in equal tandem so that they could truly share the same weight and same space. But I wasn't actually doing that. So I nixed that extra literature class, meaning I had 6 and 6, but they still were not equal because one had a capstone and one did not. So what did I do? I changed my directed study from either history or literature to interdisciplinary to broaden the scope of possibility and bumped it up to a capstone level class, creating a dualistic capstone model for my major. And the idea was that in my last semester of senior year, I would take this creative writing thesis class and this disability directed study, and they would speak to each other. It would be this one big project that spanned over 8 credit hours. Half of it would be this creative writing piece where I wrote about a disabled character and explored disability topics that I had been learning about in all of my classes, and in the disability directed study, I would be taking that topic and expanding on it, studying it, learning about it, and asking the question of how do I write about this in an authentic way. I didn't have all the details by any means, but that was okay because I knew that over the course of my 2 years in the IDIP, I would discover the topics that I wanted to study in this capstone. It felt like a stroke of genius, and also it came directly out of the feedback that I got from Dean Ansell. I felt so confident that she was going to see this and say, oh, I get it now. I see what you were going for in the first thing, and I'm so glad that you adapted it to actually be what you wanted it to be. Because yeah, the version I showed her, it makes total sense that she came back with the feedback of this doesn't feel different than the creative writing with the minor, because it wasn't, but this version was, and I just knew it was going to work. She still wasn't convinced. My heart dropped, and honestly, I was kind of angry. I didn't understand what was wrong because I had taken the feedback she'd given me, and I was so proud of the final result, and I believed in it. I believed in it so hard, and I was so desperate for her approval, and it wasn't even really because I needed her signature to turn it in. I mean, obviously, but there's an even greater emotional component to this. As a disabled woman advocating to study disability studies, I was seeking the support, validation, and acceptance of the college. I was looking for them to tell me that that is good and okay and worthwhile. I've spent my whole life being taught to be ashamed of being disabled, to push it aside, to de-center it from my life. And this action, creating this major, was centering it in every way, shape, and form. And I was tired of being told by society, by friends and family and everyone around me in some way that it wasn't a good idea, that I should just focus on creative writing and study this as like a little accessory, just like something on the side. So you can imagine that when I heard Dean Ansell tell me that I should probably just do creative writing as my major and health and society as my minor, I heard something that was feeding into this shame, this message of disability is not enough, you are not enough, it is not worthy of study, you are not worthy of existence, of space, of centering. And that hurt, and I was tired of it, and I was fed up with that message, and I was not going to put up with it any longer. And I know in retrospect, I think I even knew in the moment that she and everyone else around me, they were not trying to actively tell me to be ashamed of my disability or kick it off to the side. Dean Ansell was just looking at what I gave her in my proposal and seeing some flaws and some areas that could be improved upon, giving me feedback and allowing me to actually create the IDIP that I was trying so hard to create. I mean, if Dean Ansell hadn't given me that feedback and forced me to go back to the drawing board, I wouldn't have come to the IDIP that I ended up with, that I was so proud of, that worked out doing exactly what I wanted it to do. And so I needed that, and I needed that fighting spirit to kick into overdrive, because that's what happened. I was done putting up with all of these ideas of shame, of putting disability off to the side, making it secondary. I was going to advocate for my equal tandem creative writing and disability studies degree. I was not going to give up. Nothing was going to stop me. Honestly, I was ready to turn in the IDIP with or without her signature, because I was going to bat for what I believed in, for who I was, and what I knew that I needed and deserved and had every right to. So I emailed Dean Ansell back on that Wednesday, asked her, hey, can we have a conversation about this? Like, what's not clicking? Is there any feedback you can give me? Can I clarify anything for you? How can we move forward with this so that we can find something that works for both of us and we can get the signature taken care of? And she essentially directed me back to Lori to have a conversation more in depth about this idea of the capstone, because ultimately that's what wasn't quite clicking for her. So I talked to Lori about it first thing Thursday morning, and by the end of that conversation, Lori was, for lack of a better word, on my side. She saw the passion, she saw the belief, and at the end of the day, that's what really matters. You, as the person designing your major, have to love it, have to believe in it. And so Lori saw all that in me and said, I'm with you, this makes sense, I think you should keep fighting for it, I think you should give one last explanation to Dean Ansell, see if you can't convince her. And so I emailed Dean Ansell, and I all day was emailing back and forth with her and her secretary, trying to find a time that we could connect on that Thursday, because again, Lori was going to be out of the office on Friday. This was the last day that I had to turn this in. It was February 14th, it was Thursday, it was Valentine's Day, and it was probably one of the most hectic days of my life because I was swamped. I had an exam and therapy and class, and Dean Ansell's schedule was really busy, and it just felt like there was never going to be a time for us to connect. There were a couple moments throughout the day where we tried, but then something fell apart, and it was exhausting. I was so exhausted. I don't think I sat still the whole entire day because I was just running from place to place, scarfing down meals, trying to finish stuff, trying to meet Dean Ansell, trying to, advocate for the biggest thing I had ever advocated for. It was so much more than just a major at this point. It was like everything to me. I feel like I'm not even summing up like how big of a deal this day was, but we got to the point where it was like 3 p.m. in the afternoon. I had a class at 4, Dean Ansel had a meeting at 4, and so 3:30 was like our last chance to connect, have one last conversation, see if she would sign my thing. And then I get an email, the conflict has come up, and I sound like I'm gonna laugh right now, but I was so angry. I was just seething. I was so mad. I was like, the universe is out to get me. Like, nothing is working. Everything is falling apart. I've worked so hard for 6 months. I've put every ounce of myself and my soul into this. It means the world to me. The past few days have been such an emotional roller coaster. I just need to get the signature. I need to give my case one last time. What do I do? Well, what I do is I march over to academic advising, and this is where like you can maybe really see the desperation, because I'd emailed Lori on the way, like she knew I was coming, but I didn't have an appointment. I was just showing up at academic advising, and the poor like student worker at the desk was like, you don't have an appointment, Lori's busy, and then she's out of the office tomorrow, like I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I was like, it's an IDIP emergency, like I have to see Lori right now. Like I was just, and thank God, like Lori saw my email and she came out and she's like, come on, come back, let's talk. And like she was calm for the both of us because I had zero calm left in me. I was like, this is the end, Lori, what do I do? And honestly, it felt like there were no options. I mean, she called over to Dean Ansel's office, tried to talk to them, but she was gonna be in a meeting, and it was just like, we're out of options. We're out of options. Except Lori realized something. And this is where I realized someone is looking out for me out there. Like, finally the universe might be on my side, because guess what, y'all? The meeting that Dean Ansel was going to be in at 4 p.m., Lori was also going to be in. You cannot make this stuff up. I swear to God, you cannot make this stuff up. But they were going to be in the same meeting. And so Lori said, okay, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna sign your signature sheet right now. You're gonna give it to me. You're gonna go to class, I'm gonna go to this meeting and see if I can't get her to sign your sheet. That was the only option we had left. That was our Hail Mary. And so I said, okay. She took it, I went to class, she went to the meeting, and I sat in class for like 45 minutes, just like completely on edge. Like I couldn't focus at all. Oh, it was such a mess. And then it was break, checked my phone, had an email from Lori. She signed my IDIP! Oh my God! It was such a relief, like such a relief. But also I have to be honest, I wasn't totally relieved. I was still really nervous and I could not calm down, and I was just kind of a mess, both because I had all this residual energy and also because like it wasn't over. Like turning in the IDIP doesn't mean like, cool, you did it, you've got your major now. It means that it goes to the IDIP approval committee. Like I still had to get it approved by a committee, and Dean Ansel was on the committee. And honestly, I was like half convinced that she'd only signed off on the IDIP that day because she just wanted to like get me off her back, and then she was just gonna throw it out in the committee. Which is like so ridiculous. Like I honestly doubt that that was anywhere in her mind, because honestly I think she was really just trying to push me to create the IDIP in the best form, to make it the best that it could be and make it match exactly what I wanted, and just really push me and make me fight for it, which like can be kind of frustrating, but I think also taught me a lot about just how tenacious you have to be to get what you want, especially when you want is something that is outside of the boundaries of normal. And we can have a conversation about what that boundary means and what's within it and what's without it, and probably the fact that that boundary really shouldn't exist, and there's a lot of things that we have to fight for that we shouldn't have to fight for. But I think there's some broader lessons about the fact that, yeah, you really do have to work for things. You have to put in work and time and effort and energy, and you have to find that tenacity and that doggedness within you and go after the things you want, no matter what anyone says, no matter who tells you no, no matter how many times it takes. Just keep fighting and keep going and work your way to the ending that you deserve, the thing at the end of the mountain. Like, you are gonna get there, and you just have to keep going. So I know that now because about 2 weeks after I turned in my IDIP, I got an email while I was sitting in the very same class that I had been like 12 days prior, but I got an email that said my IDIP had been approved. I feel like I can't even sum up the joy, because just like the whole journey was such a roller coaster, but genuinely, like, it was one of the most joyous moments, like getting that, you know, that payoff from all the work, like that was enough, because I had spent so much, I put so much into it over 6 months, and especially in that last week. So to get that reward of it coming to fruition, of getting it approved, like that was so big. But like I said, this was about way more than just a major. This was about me finally fighting for disability after years and years of being taken away from my identity, of being told to be ashamed of it, of being told that I shouldn't associate myself with it. This was me fighting all of that ableism and diving in to who I am as a person. And I can't even sum that up in words in a YouTube video. Like it's such an amazing experience, and I'm so proud of that moment, how much I fought for it, how I got there, and so proud of everything that it created for me. Because that is where the story ends today, but that is of course not really where the story ends, because you create a major for 6 months, you put your whole life into it, and then you have to actually do it. I spent 2 years at Emerson College as a creative writing and disability studies major, and it was absolutely amazing. And honestly, I could make a whole nother video about that experience, because it's a really unique experience to be someone with a self-designed major. And honestly, a lot of really interesting stuff happened during my time in the Liberal Arts Institute. Lots of changes. I mean, I didn't even mention this at the top of the video, but if you're an Emerson student trying to create your own major, your process is going to be completely different than mine, because everything has changed. Like, there's so much that I could talk about from those 2 years, but like I said, that is a different story, that is a different video, and if you want that video, absolutely let me know in the comments below. But that is going to be our story for today. So thank you guys so much for watching, for listening to my experience. I hope it was helpful or motivational or interesting, whatever you needed it to be, whether you are someone trying to create your own major or just someone looking to forge their own path in life. Because to some degree, we do all have to forge our own path. Some people more than others perhaps, but we all at the end of the day have to put the hard work into creating a life that we love, that we are proud of. It takes tenacity and strength and time and effort, but it is all within you. You have the power inside of you. And so I hope you can find it within you, harness it, and use it to create the life that you deserve, because you deserve good things, and you deserve a life that is yours, unapologetically yours. So if you want to hear more of my poetic waxings, or just more stories and experiences from my life, my thoughts on things, you can check out my other videos below. You can subscribe to my channel, that would help me out a lot. You can also leave a comment or a like, check me out on other social media platforms. But seriously guys, thank you so much for your time. Please take care of yourself, and I am sending you all the best. Bye.